Welcome to another episode of The Plunge. This one's probably a shorter episode today, and today's Wednesday, and we're recording this in the afternoon just before all the slate of NBA games. And today we're going to just do a quick recap of the Chiefs-Saints game and the Jets and Rams game this Sunday, and also just our impressions on the first two games of the NBA season that happened on Tuesday. We're going to be looking at the Warriors and Nets, and then the Lakers and Clippers. So let's get started with the Chiefs and the Saints. The Chiefs pull out the win against the Saints, but clearly Drew Brees was not 100%. But Nate, what do you think of this game? And did the Saints show that the Chiefs are vulnerable?
No, the Saints didn't show that the Chiefs are vulnerable. I mean, Mahomes threw for 254 yards and 3 TDs, but really this Kansas City Chiefs team, they just toy with people at this point. I mean, you look at their past few games, they have maybe a point differential of plus 15 or something like that against some poor quality teams. But this Chiefs team isn't interested in the regular season anymore. They can't fully invest themselves in games, and they tend to let them get a lot closer at the end of games. And the Chiefs defense didn't look great against the Saints, but the only question about this team is how they'll perform against Josh Allen and a good Buffalo Bills team. But otherwise, they didn't show they were vulnerable in this game. They only won by a few points, but they clearly were the better team again this week.
Yeah, and when you mentioned they were toying with the Saints, I think Mahomes' definition of toying is throwing for 254 yards and 3 TDs, which is very, very impressive. And just looking at their stats, they had 411 total yards against the Saints 285. So yeah, I agree with you in terms of just how good they are, and yeah, they're just ramping up for the postseason, and they can afford to rest guys at this point, and it's more of just looking ahead. So
yeah, after you're a team who's won a Super Bowl and has consistently played well in the postseason, you just forget about the regular season sometimes. Like their loss to the Las Vegas Raiders and all these games that have gone a much closer, like the Tampa Bay game, which they dominated. It seems like the Chiefs are just uninterested in the regular season at this point, and yet they still win almost every game they play. So let's get into this Jets and Rams game. Who's the bigger loser in this one? The Jets for winning or the Rams for losing?
It's the Jets for winning. That is no doubt about it. Like, sure, the Rams just lost to the worst team in the NFL, but come on, it's the Rams. They're under a head coach in Sean McVay. You got Jared Goff. You have Super Bowl experience. There's no way this taints your profile for this postseason in terms of you just lost to the worst team in the NFL. Like, I think the Rams can totally get it back together, and it's more of a loss in the Jets because they just lose their race for the first overall pick in getting Trevor Lawrence. And so it just gets from bad to worse for the Jets, where they intentionally tank games. They intentionally just throw away their entire playbook to win, and they just somehow win. And just the front office of the Jets is probably thinking like, man, yeah, we got our first win, but at what cost, And so I think this is more of a bigger loss for the Jets instead of the Rams. So what else do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I have to disagree with you on the front office. The front office must be pissed after this game. I mean, this was really the Sam Darnold and Adam Gase revenge game. They're both going to be gone next season. They should be replaced by not Trevor Lawrence anymore, but maybe Justin Fields of Ohio State. And Adam Gase will be fired after this year for a terrible year of coaching this year. And man, the Jets are definitely the loser out of this one. I mean, they lost out on a generational talent in Trevor Lawrence, and Justin Fields, the second best quarterback in this draft, looked terrible last week against Northwestern, a team who shouldn't have been in that game at all, but stuck around with Ohio State. So it seems that the gap between Lawrence and everyone else in this draft is widening, and the Jets just managed to lose out on losing. So not a great day for this franchise.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to our main NBA games that were happening on Tuesday. And so we're going to start with the Warriors and Nets. The Nets completely blow out the Warriors. I watched most of that game, and just seeing them so dominant is just so indicative of what they can become, finishing first or second in the Eastern Conference, maybe making the finals. Me and Nate both predict we're going to make the finals. So, anyways, so seeing that the Nets have just completely wiped the floor of the Warriors, should the Nets be the favorite in the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, I'm not a guy who's too big on jumping to conclusions on the first night, but you saw everything you needed to see with this Nets team to know that they should be the favorite in the Eastern Conference. I mean, Durant pulling up from three, like blowing by defenders, dunking on them. What did he lose from his game? He looks exactly the same as he did in Golden State. And Kyrie, you can talk about all the sage he wants to burn before the start of games, or you can talk about his issues off the court, but he played fantastic. I mean, these guys are dynamic. They're great players. They seem to play well together. And one thing that sticks out to me about two superstars on the same team is usually you need to surround two superstars with shooters. Like you look at the Lakers with Davis and LeBron, they're both okay three shooters, but they need to be surrounded by talent shooting. These two superstars in Kyrie and KD are your shooters. And you add Joe Harris, like this team can shoot the lights out. They have an awesome second unit with LeVert and Dinwiddie and Jared Allen playing a lot of the second unit minutes. And this team has shown everything within this first game that I need to see to pick them as the best team in the Eastern Conference at this point. Okay, so to carry on with that game, Jacob, who shined and who disappointed for the Warriors in this blowout?
Well, let's start with who disappointed, and it's no doubt that it's Andrew Wiggins, and everyone's like been just hoping for Wiggins to be reinvented by the Warriors offense, and Steve Kerr just going to do his magic and making him an entirely different player. But after seeing him play yesterday, like he looked the exact same as he was in the past 5 years in the NBA. He was just forcing his own shot, like calling for ISOs and just airballing. He stepped out of bounds like twice. He traveled like 2 or 3 times. He had like 4 turnovers in total, and he shot a dismal 4 for 16. And just seeing him play like that, it kind of worries me a little bit in terms of what that will look like for the rest of the season. But I think people jump to quick conclusions, and it's kind of annoying how people think, oh, it's over for the Warriors. They're not going to figure this out. Like, hey, they just played the best team in the league probably. They got blown up by KD and Kyrie. Like, you got to give them a lot of slack. And this is their first time playing since, April? And Steph just came back from a hand injury. Like, he hasn't played in a year, right? So you got to give this team a lot of slack. And because of that, I think James Wiseman played really well, given that it was his first game in like a year and a half, where he only played 3 games in Memphis, never played in preseason, no summer camp, no barely any training camp reps. And he comes into this game, plays about 25 minutes, and scores 19 points, 6 rebounds. He looked pretty great. In terms of just adjusting to the NBA, he needs to get used to it a little bit, because there's a couple times where he shot the ball with his feet on the 3-point line. And so it's more of just getting used to not just the NBA 3-point line, but just the environment that he plays in. But in terms of his first game, he played really well and he adjusted pretty well. Caught a couple of lobs, got some good rebounds, shot the ball pretty well. So going back to the Nets in terms of what you're saying and how good they were, I just want to add one more point to your explanation of the Nets, where I think the Nets are going to have a top 5 defense in the league. And the reason I say that is because Jared Allen and DeAndre Jordan are 2 elite shot blockers, and having those guys in your rotation, you can afford perimeter defenders just to run guys off the line and just allow drivers to get in the paint, because Allen and Jordan are there to contest that shot. So what are your thoughts in terms of the Warriors and the Nets in this game?
Yeah, I would have to agree with you that Andrew Wiggins was terrible in this game, but I don't think it's indicative of the rest of the season. I mean, you look at Steph last night, he played great, and Kelly Oubre didn't have a good debut. Draymond Green didn't play. James Wiseman had his first game out there, and Andrew Wiggins was terrible. But I don't think he is an unsalvageable player, because you have the likes of Draymond Green out there prompting him to play better defense, and that's really what you need out of Wiggins. I mean, he's got all the tools to be a great defender, and last night did scare me as a guy who predicted that the Warriors would be a 6 seed because they did look outside of Steph stagnant on offense. And you watch the highlights, and Steph is creating and doing all this great stuff for the offense, but also it's a large burden for him to carry, and he's never had to carry a burden like that before. But that being said, I believe in this Warriors team. It was a great sign last night. Wiseman, I mean, he looked like he had Gobert plus potential, where Gobert defensively is going to be his ceiling. But you look at his offense, and he looked smooth out there. I mean, he's coordinated for a big guy at 7 foot, and he's got a great wingspan, and he's trying to develop that outside shot. But man, this team is exciting a year from now because you bring back Klay Thompson to pair with a dynamic player like James Wiseman, in which I think he showed he can be last night. And you match that with Draymond Green's energy and whoever you end up keeping out of Wiggins and Oubre, you have something brewing there. But this game showed that they don't have championship potential yet. I'm not quick to call them out for being a non-playoff team, but they're clearly not championship contenders this year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on your take on Wiggins. Like, I agree that he's not not a salvageable player. I think he can for sure improve. It's only the first game, and people just rush to conclusions and take like big conclusions out of small sample sizes. So I wouldn't worry too much about Wiggins. It's just more of me just being disappointed in his play. But another thing about the Nets actually, and Karis LeVert, he has so much freedom when he plays with the second unit. Like, you watch that guy, like they got like a bunch of offensive boards one possession, and then they just got the ball back to LeVert every time, and he just ISO'd with like 5 guys out and just cleared the paint for him, and he just does his thing. And so having that weapon in LeVert as your second unit is so powerful in terms of just the versatility that you have on offense, and just seeing even the Nets play. You have so many ISO guys in like Dinwiddie, Irving, Durant, LeVert, but they still ran their offense. They still played team basketball. They still were able to find Joe Harris in the corner. They were able to like dribble and kick and drive, all while also getting those ISO looks. So I think distributing and balancing your different offensive strategies is really important in terms of the Nets, where you got to have X amount of Durant post-ups. You got to have, X amount of Kyrie ISOs mixed in with team basketball. And I think people might assume that, the Nets are just going to play ISO ball all season, but I think that's really not correct. And I think the Nets really do have great team chemistry, and being under Coach Nash and even Mike D'Antoni, I think you can say that the Nets will have very good team chemistry this year.
Yeah, I made that assumption too, that the Nets would be primarily a isolation team, because you look at Jaylen Brown, who Kyrie played before, and he kind of filled that same LeVert role where his value is in being a secondary scorer. And I didn't think that those two could function well together. I mean, you saw LeVert last night. He put up 29 and 5. I'm impressed by the calming presence that Kevin Durant is for Kyrie's game, and that team looks even better than I thought they would look all season just in last night's game. You look at Dinwiddie, you look at LeVert, those guys are players, those guys are real assets to that team, and I thought they would really depreciate in their value, but in that first game, it looked like that team can actually play together, and that's scary for every other team in the Eastern Conference, especially Giannis Antetokounmpo, who just signed for 5 years with the Bucks team, who doesn't have that same level of talent as this Brooklyn team.
Yeah. So moving on, onto the last game of Tuesday's doubleheader, Lakers and Clippers. Clippers get a win over the Lakers, and Paul George returns to form. People forget how good he was 2 years ago, and he's got 2 healthy shoulders. And so, Nate, should the Clippers be the favorite with this version of Paul George?
Not the favorite, but they should be tied with the Lakers as the favorite to win. You look at this team, I mean, last year they had they had all the analysts picking them as the team to win halfway through the season. And Paul George wasn't looking good halfway through the season, and he's got another season of a healthy shoulder in him. I mean, the playoff run for the Lakers last year was built around LeBron's dominance and AD's dominance, but LeBron's getting older, and he didn't have a defender like Kawhi or Paul George on him anytime during the playoffs. And this team is scary. I mean, you had Luke Kennard, who looked all right last night, and more shooting with him and Batum. And this team seems to have better chemistry. I know Serge Ibaka is always a guy who is a joy to have in the clubhouse. And people really want to write off this Clippers team as a lost team, and they expect Kawhi Leonard to consider leaving next year. But this team continues to perform for the majority of the season. And last season in the playoffs, apart from 3 games where they had a catastrophic meltdown, they were arguably the best team in the bubble. I mean, they beat a tough Dallas team in the first round, which was much tougher than the first round for the Lakers last year and the Trailblazers. And they look like a team who should be at least tied in the odds with the Lakers at this point. And I think they could even edge them in the odds later in the season as we progress.
Yeah, and just looking at their depth, like they won about 10, 11 guys deep last night, and just showing how getting guys like Nick Batum, Serge Ibaka, bringing back Reggie Jackson, they're one of those teams who are just, again, very deep this season, and it's up to Ty Lue and this coaching staff to really exploit that depth that you have. Like Reggie Jackson only played 3 minutes, and I think he's a very, very important point guard for the Clippers, and even for any NBA team, who should get at least 15, maybe even 20 minutes. So just seeing that Jackson only gets 3 minutes just shows how potent their offense and defense is without Jackson. When you bring back Lou Williams, who's just a walking bucket, when you got guys like Luke Kennard, Ivica Zubac is now coming off the bench, who can even start a game, right? And so I think that the depth of the Clippers really plays into their success for the season.
Yeah, when Paul George's shoulder looks healthy, he's one of the smoothest players in the league. I mean, the way he maneuvers around screens and pulls up for threes and can pull up in the mid-range, you can forget at times that he's a legit 3-level player and can play anywhere on the floor. But he really showed us again last night why this Clippers team was favored last year and why they shouldn't be forgotten this year. So carrying on from this game, should the Lakers feel like their championship chances are in jeopardy?
Well, it's always going to be in jeopardy once you come off a championship, right? It's like it doesn't really matter. Like you're defending champions. Of course, your championship chances are going to be in jeopardy when there's a bunch of teams coming after you now. And yeah, sure. I think the Clippers are a real threat to the Lakers, and just because the Lakers have come off a shortened off season, the most out of everyone, maybe except Miami, it would be really interesting to see how they can recover and be back at 100% when the playoffs roll around. Because you saw LeBron sit out the last 8 minutes of the game because they didn't want to play through his rolled ankle. So I think it'll be interesting to see. But even that being said, you got a guy in Dennis Schroeder who almost posted a triple-double last night. You got Montrezl Harrell. Like, those 2 guys alone can literally carry your offense and your defense when you have to rest LeBron, when you have to rest AD. So I think they'll be completely fine. But the challenge of opposing teams is going to be a lot harder this year than last year, and their championship run this year will very much be really, really hard this year when you have the Nets, the Bucks, teams like the Clippers, who all got better. They will very much challenge the Lakers this year.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I mean, this game was a wake-up call to them. The West is stacked again this year. They have incredible teams 1 through 8, and they should all give the Lakers a run for their money. And that doesn't mean that this Lakers team isn't the best team in the NBA right now. I mean, they're on par with any other team talent-wise. They have 2 of the greatest players in the league, the best tandem in the league, and they should be the favored team still, carrying on from last year. But there are a lot of teams who are closing in on that talent gap. Like you mentioned, Brooklyn looked great last night, and they're a team that they could likely face in the finals. LeBron didn't have to face a Kawhi last year in the playoffs, which clearly makes the game much tougher for him. And I don't see the Lakers' chances in jeopardy, but the other teams have greater chances than believed before this season when everyone was calling the Lakers an early season favorite.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at their roster, they're just way too versatile. And if you take Braun or Davis out of the lineup, like I said before, Schroeder and Harrell are just such good players that they can carry the load. And so it's up to Vogel in terms of just managing these guys' health throughout the season and just picking and choosing when to play and how to manage these guys' minutes in terms of how you're gonna do in the playoffs through the management of your players in the regular season. So, any other thoughts from your impressions for this season or the past two games that started the season?
No, I would just say that there's some great games coming up tonight, and as an NBA fan, keep your eyes on the Trailblazers Utah game as well as the Suns and Mavs game. These games should tell you the middle to bottom of the Western Conference playoffs, and these top seeded teams are going to see what they're going to have to face in the first round of the playoffs, and it's not going to be what they like to see because these teams are insanely talented and play hard.
Yeah, and one more question for you, Nate. You saw Paul George's misplay on that pass to nobody, right? Or pass to the ref that game, right?
Yeah.
If you were refing that game and you're that ref in the right corner, would you have caught the ball and shot it?
You have to shoot it. You're out here playing on a $300,000 contract. You got to give yourself a shot at getting that 10-day contract with the Clippers next season. So,
yeah, I know I would totally take that shot because that right corner is literally my spot, and you know that. So if I was reffing that game, I would have caught and shot that ball right there. Like, man, Paul George, I got you, man. You're like being trashed on the internet. I'm being pandemic B, playoff P. Man, I'm gonna make up your name here. I'll make that shot for you, give you an assist there. Yeah. So. Yeah, this wraps up our pod today. This is going to be a very interesting season. I'm very excited for the slate of games tonight and for the rest of this week. I'm excited for my fantasy team, to be honest, actually, and just my Blazers. I'm so excited to watch them this season. Their new squad. I got high hopes for them. Anyways, thank you for listening to our episode again. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and have a great holiday and Christmas break. We will see you soon.